the hot world, the divided world, the increasingly authoritarian world, and how do we meet that, and how is it beginning to erode the normality of what the world we thought was that's fast changing, and where does that leave us? So people are feeling it everywhere.
Hey everyone, it's Raghu back with Mindrolling, and I have the pleasure of hanging out with Thanissara, who you may have met before because we've done some lovely podcasts together. Welcome, Thanissara.
Thank you. So nice to be here. Greetings, Raghu.
Yeah. Every time somebody says that, I think of Keith Richard when they said to him, Keith, so great to have you here. He said, great to be anywhere.
He would say that.
Yeah, right. Exactly. So, Thanissara, excuse me, for those of you who don't know, has been involved in Buddhism as a Buddhist teacher and done some great, great work over many, many years. And and she doesn't even know this, but it is the end. This is the end of 2022. And I thought, I want to do something that looks to did I say 22, 23?
Actually, yeah. I was just trying to...
Okay, some of 23 was a little rough, shall we say the least. We were just talking about us being together at this retreat in Maui and the devastation from the Maui fires. There's been a lot in 23 I guess I wanted to forget about. But we're going into 24, and I wanted to just look at that a little bit in relation to what we can anticipate, and at the same time, what we can do in terms of our practice and practical perspective on how to relate with everything that's going on. A lot of it is very difficult, to say the least. So I thought, who better to do this with than Thanissara? So here we are.
Here we are.
Meanwhile, just catching up a little bit about, just tell me a little bit of what you've been up to lately. And how, I'm most interested around, your students and people that you're, spending time with, and how they are navigating and how they have navigated this last year, which, been tough.
Well, I'm involved in a number of different communities, both local to me, where I am. I'm in Sebastopol, Northern California. It's about an hour and a half north of San Francisco. I also have connections into the community to some degree in the Dharma in UK, where I'm originally from, and South Africa, where I've worked for several decades. And, also not only in the Dharma world, but I've also been now nearly a decade involved in the plant medicine world. And, of course, that's a whole different kind of community, but a lot of interface with Dharma. I think everyone is feeling it. Everyone is feeling this growing intensity, both in their personal lives and in the collective. And there's a sort of process of making sense. I think making sense of this moment on the planet. And part of that for me is also being involved with activists and climate activists, and reading the tea leaves of where people are, what's happening on that level. So there's this confluence of these extraordinary forces that are bringing to light in this moment, as the veils drop away, the depth of the illusions that we've built our world on, our civilization on, and what does that mean as those myths, if you like, civilizational myths, aren't holding up to the shifts that need to happen to enable us to live in a way that we have some kind of sustainable, more beautiful future that isn't a future that just devolves into the extraordinary levels of violence on this hotter, more divided world. We, of course, have this movement of increased fascism and authoritarianism that's being normalized in countries we never would have thought we'd see that. Like, for example, in my own home country of the UK, where they're literally arresting non-violent, peaceful, very peaceful protesters demonstrating for the climate in one way or another without due real process in court and imprisoning. And
seriously, I didn't know this.
Well, people are very shocked about this, the authoritarianism, the hijack. This isn't really government that we have anymore. We have a sort of a hijacked so-called government that's really serving an elite, the wealth of an elite and the agenda of an elite. And in that process, it requires the undoing of human rights, of workers' rights, of environmental protections. And this is happening at speed in the UK since the Brexit vote actually enabled that hijack, really, and the undoing of usual democratic judicial processes that actually sustain a sort of moral and value system which upholds the ability for us to live with decency and with dignity and sustaining humane values. So a lot of that is being eroded. And, in a certain way, these communities that I'm involved with, Dharma, whether it's plant medicine, whether it's, there's a sort of bubble that we're in, spiritualized communities. We're in this bubble still in the Northern Hemisphere and the Northern world, where we're impacted, like you were talking about Maui, the fires, the horror of that we saw earlier this year. It's nearly last year, and we're nearly in that transitional moment coming to the end of the year here, 2023. But just so much more. But somehow we bounce back and maintain this sense of normalizing our lifestyles that have been predicated on a world that's fast disappearing. And we haven't quite caught up to speed of how we need the curriculum that we're now in and how we need to adjust to that curriculum. So these are the sorts of conversations I'm trying to have with myself, firstly, never mind anyone else, but also with others and also leaders. What does this, in these communities, what does this mean for us? How do we differentiate? Because people are very nervous in spiritual communities, nonprofit worlds, of coming out too politically. And there's, of course, a historical bypass around that. So to try and differentiate that political positioning is different. Well, there's an interface, but it can be different from taking a moral stance, against massive violence like we're seeing in the Middle East right now, for example, in Gaza in particular. So, the hot world, the divided world, the increasingly authoritarian world, and how do we meet that, and how is it beginning to erode the normality of what the world we thought was that's fast changing, and where does that leave us? So people are feeling it everywhere, not just in those communities, but I think everyone is feeling it on the planet, actually.
Yeah, I think the reality is that we are getting, in a very weird way, conditioned by and inured to all of this. Climate change, violence, wars, pestilence, all of it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a lot. And we are getting inured to it. It's just becoming part of the fabric where we don't pause the way we paused when it first came out. Just think of the pandemic. I mean, right. I know plenty of people are still getting COVID and getting sick. Maybe it's, if you're younger, it's just like a flu and so on. But they're reporting 1,000 people a day are are getting are dying.
Wow.
1,000? No, not a day. I'm sorry, a week.
Oh,
that's
right.
still a lot.
That's still a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, that's still a lot.
Yeah.
So I think that on its own is a huge issue. You know, how we're mindfully handling this, I think, is super important. I had this. I just found this book, or was sent to me. It's the mystical poetry of Kabir. You know, the saying from the 16th century, 15th, 16th century,
yes.
I think. Yes. Yeah. So this, if I remember correctly, which I pretty well do because I remember those days with Neem Karoli Baba, but he was the one quote that he would quote of anybody was Kabir. Yeah.
Wow.
I particularly remember him quoting about walking through the marketplace, you know, not being pulled in any direction whatsoever, not being pulled by material, not being pulled by the temples and the objects of worship and so on. But so I found this. I thought I'd read it because it totally addresses what we were just talking about. Tell me, it's called Illusion, appropriately.
Yeah.
Tell me, my friend, how can I get rid of all this illusion? When I gave up tying pretty bows around packages, I still tied my pants up with a string. When I gave up tying up my pants, I still wore shirts that didn't fit. When I gave up my sexual longings, I found that I was angry all day. When I gave up my anger, I became even more greedy than before. Even when I was able to get rid of my greed, pride and vanity took its place. When the mind is empty and illusion is thrown away, it still hangs on to one thing. Kabir says, listen to what I have to say. There are very few who find their way. It's kind of depressing, really, when you think about it. Yes, there's very few that find their way. So, you know, I think about the reality of us as aspirants, shall we say, on the path.
Yes.
Seekers, however we want to characterize ourselves, that we can't be looking at the end. We can't be looking at, we see what's going on with climate change and we are going to take actions and then we want to see results because that's how we're oriented as humans, especially here in the West. So I really do believe we have to take all the actions that are necessary internally to do the kinds of things that we need to do as human beings, as citizens on this planet, so that there can be a future for next generation, et cetera, et cetera. And I, you know, so that requires some of what you teach, I believe, on a day-to-day basis, which is mindfulness, which, you know, one of the biggest things that we get back from people who we do retreats and courses with through Love, Serve, Remember Foundation around Ram Dass and many of the other teachers that you and I have as mutual friends. And they ask for the most basic, simple directives. Like, I can't sit. I can't sit quietly even. And then I have a hell of a time with my mind if I should try and meditate. How about let's address that? I think it's really, you know, it's a basic response that we get from people who maybe they're just starting out on the path, but no, there's people that have been meditating for years and they're still getting into that chasm of monkey mind.
Well, I think you you sort of named one of the obstacles within the question itself, which is this idea of having a goal that we have to get to. That we have an action and we're wanting to get to somewhere rather than we're actually entering a deep process, a collective process. And this isn't just me. I think also the way that we've approached the meditative awakening process is very much centered around the individuality, the heightened sense of individualism in this culture of me doing this. And in a world that's more and more atomized and the enormity of what we're facing, there has to be a sense of collective. And I think one of the dynamics in this individualism and how mindfulness and Dharma and meditation has historically been transmitted from the ancient lineages of Asia into the West. Yeah. In the ancient lineages, it was really held very collectively. Often you're working in community or sitting together. So if you can't do it, there's, other people holding that space. There's living together. You feel yourself as a sense of belonging. And I think what people are actually confronted with when they try and sit is this lack of connection and belonging and feeling a sense from that of being held and safety, and then allowing the nervous system to be recalibrated and aligned. So there's a lot of difficulty in the whole approach. So I would say, firstly, there's this line from the suttas which goes, Magga hati kilesa wa patunu pati tamatang. So to translate that, which I think is a really, really important line, it means, Magga means the path, Hatha means to break up, kilesa means these obstructions. So the path breaks up. The path activity breaks up this the obstructions that you're talking about that people feel. And in that process, the second line, pata, the fruit, upati, the fruit of that process, the fruit of awakening arises, tamatang, which means according to nature, according to the Dharma. So one of the difficulties is this sense again of me doing this. The me trying to do this is never going to do it. But if we understand that, in fact, what we're actually asked to do in the Dharma, in the meditation, is just to apply this in this moment, because this is the only moment really there is, this eternal moment, is to apply some medicine of the path. So it might be just, can I just feel my feet on the ground? Lower the bar rather than have the bar. So people have the bar so high, and to realize, to work with the mind, the unfettered mind, the mind that hasn't had any sense of containment in relationship to the practice of meditation, it's going to need a lot of patience. So can I just maybe sit for 10 minutes and take 10, count on my fingers? I mean, I still do this, after 50 years of practice. I start very, very, it's very, in a way, what we'll ask, what's happening is something very simple. It's to taste the natural state of your being here, which is always peaceful, always inviting, always opening and revelatory unto its own nature. What's complex is the way that the mind moves around that. So to do something simple like touch each finger and take 10 deepening, slowing breaths. Maybe do it laying down if you can't sit up. Just find a place where you feel comfortable, where you feel supported. I often start with taking very deep, moderating the breath. This was taught by one of the great meditation masters of Thailand, Ajahn Lee Dhammadharo, who's no longer alive. He passed over in the 1950s, I think. But he talked about, he was known as the Samadhi King of Thailand. Yeah. He was a contemporary of Ajahn Chah, the Forest School of Thailand, which produced these amazing meditation masters. And he would talk about moderating the breath. So you don't necessarily just sit, like from your daily life. You go, you take a 10 minutes to change gears. Maybe you put on some beautiful music. Maybe you just lay down and take some moderating the breath. What I do is like deep, slow breaths, often through my mouth, and just feeling the breath energy with awareness suffuse the whole body, right? It's like a subtle, gentle pranayama. I'm not trying to do like a massive, I'm not doing Wim Hof, I'm not doing holotropic, I'm not doing pranayama. I'm just laying there with some really cool, spiritual, beautiful music. And I take like a slow breath through my body and just feeling that the body starts to recalibrate, the nervous system. And then some more liminal space starts to open as the body recalibrates. And then from there, you naturally start to feel a sense of connection, ground, and you can move from there. So I think it's just that people have an idea of what meditation is, particularly if they're starting. They have when they're starting, they have a goal of where they think they should be, and that's already going to set them up for struggle. But if you have the idea that I'm just receptive to how it is, I'm going to be patient with how it is, I'm going to breathe through what is presenting itself to me, and just feel the ground in the midst of that, even if it's just a little bit of sense of contact with the field of awareness within which everything is arising, that you're noticing as it passes and changing, even if it's walking and you just feel a step on the ground, one step after another, even making a cup of tea, like just take something and just slow it down a bit. These are very profound shifts, actually. So you like lower the bar and have small successes, and then you build on that. Otherwise, you feel a failure, and then you never do it again.
Yeah, right. Right. Oh, boy. I like to think also, that's really great grounding advice. Not overreaching, not thinking you should be somewhere where you're not. None of those things. They don't really matter. What matters is like, the feet on the ground. That's what matters. Yeah.
I think it's these small steps, and then that's the path activity in and of itself creates the conditions for what you are not in control of. We're not in control of the awakening process. That's like, as Ajahn Chah say, it's like the fruit ripening. It will fall in its own time. You can't grow the flower. The flower grows. You cultivate the field for that flower.
Right. Do you? I know you know who. Well, I'm pretty sure you know who Roshi Bernie Glassman was.
Yes, I do. Yes.
So he had a beautiful thing, not knowing.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And I think that all of us, developing a perspective from which to see how we can get into the kind of internal change that would allow us to be more balanced on a day-to-day basis. And I think part of that perspective certainly is the idea of not knowing.
Yeah, I think that's really that's the ground of the meditative process. I mean, actually, if you unpack the word for wisdom in Sanskrit, which is prajna, it literally means before you know, meaning before you know through the mind that separates out the sense of me knowing it. We might call separative consciousness. There's a me knowing it. And that is an assumption that both have solidity and reality. And because we have a name for the it, like that's a tree, we think we know it. And so we know things through language, through description, through the cognitive process. But there's a whole other dimension of knowing, which is actually through the stripping away of what we think we know. And, this is entering the field of awareness itself, which is boundaryless. It's beneath the cognitive frame. And that knowing is the knowing that intimately experiences directly what is. May not have even language to, even about ourselves. We think we even know ourselves, but we have a very limited frame that we look through of conditioning and narratives. This is what I am, but what are we really? What is this breath? What is this experience I'm having, So that not knowing is an invitation for this deep receptivity, inquiry, openness, investigation. And that's really brings a lot of energy and ability to learn something that comes from perhaps this prajna, this deep intelligence. Something that's not clear to us will then become revealed. Maybe we never knew that before, but in that open space, there's something new that becomes apparent to us.
Yeah.
And that's a very beautiful thing. We realize actually things are to be known, but not necessarily in the way we knew them before.
And that I don't think you can talk about the not knowing without getting comfortable with uncertainty.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. And the reality of anitya,
yes,
constant change. And how do we get friendly with that? Which I think, again, this is part of developing a perspective that allows us to go and be with ourselves internally in a peaceful way, be with ourselves in a developed way where you start to see changes, like not so reactive to our thoughts, not believing in our thoughts. Some of the most fundamental ways in which we live on a day-to-day basis and are, completely attached to the reality that we think we are in. And,
Yeah. I think change is a very profound gateway. To see change is to lead to the changeless. Like to realize what is knowing change? What is that which knows change, which is present to change? So at first, the meditation, we're looking at the objects, if you like, the vipassana, to look at the nature of what is arising and passing, the nature, not so much the content, but the constructs of the mind, that everything is subject to. It was dawn and now it's dusk. I was happy and now there's sadness. There's hunger and then I ate and there's fullness. There's constantly, from the most coarse to the most subtle vibratory experience of sensation. So everything's in this flux. But that which knows, this is the deathless citta, if you like, the unchanging citta, heart, mind itself. It's that which is illuminating change. Is that changing? This deeper inquiry is what is changeless. This was the Buddha's, what is deathless? This is the Buddha's inquiry. And it's our inquiry too. Because I think once we have and it's said in the Dharma, that's ever present, ever inviting, ever opening, ever sort of revealing itself to us, illuminating each moment. Once we rest more there, then the change, we're less sort of perhaps grappling with change itself. We can have a bit more of a spacious, peaceful relationship to the changing experience of the world, Yeah,
and when we speak to the reality of impermanence, which is what we're speaking to, we have to talk about, to me, one of the core issues that we find it very difficult to deal with as individuals and collectively, fear. Fear really gets our attention. And today we have quite a bit of fear to go around for everybody. But if you look at, if we talk about what's going on with environmental destruction and so on, and, you see this manifestation, which you realize that you as an individual are very much part of this manifestation. This isn't something you can blame on anybody. Yes, you can go after all the, of course, you can be mad at all the profit-making gigantic oil companies and whoever else, coal, all of it. You can go after all that blame. But I think if you really realize that we as individuals have deep responsibility for everything that is going on now. And then I see in myself, fear may arise in terms of the reality of feeling completely at loggerheads with our ability to make the kind of individual change. And I'm not talking about recycling. Okay, I've done it. I got a recycling can. I'm talking about just, again, the perspective that we have that is so skewed by the reality, in this case, of climate change. So it's so skewed by our own. Again, I said earlier, we get inured to all of this, and it's a complete bypass that happens. So I think we do have to deal with fear, absolutely, on an individual and collective basis.
Yeah. I mean, there's quite a few different things you're capturing there that are big. Fear is. I mean, there's certain fears that are actually not necessarily bad. Like if you're driving off a cliff, if you're driving towards a cliff, you would have like the fear of going off that would help you change course. So there's fears that can be awakening. And there's also just the habit of fear, the uninvestigated nature of fear, which again, once you get an understanding of how to work with the states of mind that come up, the obstructions, and rather than see them as obstructions, you see them as ways of really sharpening our wisdom and our compassion. So they're necessary parts of the path. Then fear is something one can engage with and work with. But the piece I would challenge in what you're saying is that, yes, of course we have to make an individual change, but we don't have the power of governments and corporations and billionaires who are increasingly controlling the destiny of the planet. And, what we do have is a lack of wise leadership. And so while I can make the changes, I can get an electric car, I can eat vegan, I can do all these things, which are going to help. And I think, as much as everyone can do that. But we actually, we just saw at COP28 that the whole process of that, which is the meeting of the different countries around the world to engage this absolutely critical emergency that we're plunging into. We've passed 7 tipping points. They're irreversible, which means that we're going to be very soon in an increasingly, Maui type situation that you just experienced, where people had a few minutes to decide, do they run for their lives or do they stay in their car? I was reading about, someone that with the friends, and he was a military person, so he understood, I think, much more quickly what was happening, and he was encouraging people in the car to run, and they felt safer to stay in the car. Well, he never saw them again, but he ran. People don't understand that once you're in these tipping points, you don't have the luxury we have now to make these, to talk about these things, to decide. You're actually in the least optimum place that you can be, because you're activated by real fear and terror. Your brain is deregulating and you don't know how to respond. You're frozen. So, these are the things that in the spiritual and Dharma community, we can actually start to practice for this world we're going into, and also practice what it is to challenge those that have massive power, to have a moral backbone, to have a moral soul, and to respond accordingly. So in the COP21, that was completely hijacked by the fossil fuel industries. And they decided, well, we'll carry on extracting fossil fuels, which needs to stop immediately. But, we'll put up a few more windmills. But if you don't actually, all of that investment, and we're talking of trillions of dollars, which you and I don't have control over that as an individual. Governments have control, petro empires have control, billionaires have control. They have the power. They have real power. If you direct that power to completely invest, radically invest, you could mobilize a war effort, say in the Second World War, mobilize a massive war effort very quickly. In COVID, managed to shut down everything very quickly. There could be a massive mobilization, which is what we need to save our planet, to save, a livable environment. And this has to happen in this decade. Beyond this decade, we're just dealing with crisis management, more wars, more starvation, more migrations, and none of us will escape that. So this is a very critical moment.
Yeah.
You can't put that on the individual. What we can do. I mean, we have no wise leadership at this level, really. Let's look at it. I mean, those that are coming out, like, the General Secretary of the UN, Antonio Guterres, and so on, they're coming out, they're saying the right things, but they have no power. So they have no power to do anything. So we're like, it's going to be up to us as citizens to actually do what's happening now around the world in response to Gaza. People are out on the streets. They're actually using their power to mobilize, to demonstrate, to call on governments to actually it hasn't been successful in the US because of the dynamic between the US and Israel, but around the world to call on a ceasefire. But it's showing the power of citizens together. And I think this is what we have to feel into. It has to be a collaborative, collective effort,
Yeah. Yeah. But I do think that, and Ram Dass used to say this all the time, that you have to work on yourself before you can even think that you can have a voice that's going to have any possibility to make a change. You have to do it both at the same time.
I would say both at the same time. We can't wait till we're perfect.
No,
absolutely. We can't wait for that. We might, like everyday people can do something. It's true. A shift of consciousness underwrites the systemic shifts we need. So we're all working on the shift of consciousness, but we have to also know, how do we then apply that? How do we? So right now, I'm just inviting Dharma practitioners into this conversation through the platform that we host. It's like, there's this sort of sense where we want to be neutral because we don't want to alienate anyone. It's like, well, you can take a moral stance, and call out these issues without necessarily. I mean, you're not going to include everyone, but this is what spiritual change makers have done historically through time. They take a stance, but they take it from a very deep spiritual place. So they're not personally excluding people; they're including everyone in the circle of love and compassion. But they're saying, this needs to be protected, I mean, we saw that demonstrated with Maharaji. There were moments when he would just like kick people out or go no, or this fierceness. I mean, I've seen it in Ram Dass. There were moments when he would come over pretty fierce. I remember at a talk in London that he was pretty strong about things, and he wasn't a pushover. It wasn't like love means I accept everything. It was like, no, this behavior. Even the Buddha got out in front of wars and tried to stop them. He tried to stop 3 times the slaughter of his own people, the Sakyan clan. And there's a whole backstory. It was a revenge story, like we're seeing now. It was a revenge story where the Kolyans came and they wanted to wipe out his clan. And he got out there 3 times and tried to stop this army. He literally put his body in front of them and was negotiating, and he couldn't stop them, actually. But the point was he tried. And he knew, in the end, that karma was too strong. But that didn't mean to say he didn't do it. And I think this is a great example. I mean, there are moments that he did succeed, but, not in every situation, for sure. Yeah. But it doesn't mean to say that we can't try. So I think this is a good precedent for us we don't have to be perfect. We just try, try to do what we can.
I met somebody recently, did a podcast named Susan Murphy. She's from Australia. I'm not sure she's a Zen person, and wrote a really great book that was really addressing climate issues, the environment, and really cross-referencing that to our own internal climate, shall we say.
Right.
I just want to read one. This addresses pretty much what we're talking about. She says, demented human-created systems like those now devouring the life of the earth need to come apart so we can discover the true ground of being here where we are. The human being safely tucked into the small self needs to fall away freely in order to find the original, unimpeded self that is shared with all beings. There is a consonance between these two matters that compels close attention, and rightfully so, because self-relinquishment opens a wider perspective at every point.
Beautifully said.
Isn't it well said?
Yeah, very well said. Yeah. I think that's what's happening at this time with the intensity and the sense of free fall. It's a bit like, sometimes I think of it like a collective shamanic journey, when what you've known yourself to be, the shapes that you're in, are falling apart. It's like an ego death. It's very terrifying because you don't know where you'll land. And in a way, we're sort of at that moment. And in that process, all the shadow issues are released, all the old ancestral unhealed wounds emerge. And it's, you know, it is what we're looking at now. You know, it's terrifying, it's overwhelming, it feels really, you know, it's deeply painful. It brings up everything you can feel all at once that's difficult to feel. And yet, at the same time, it is a portal that we're going through, a portal to understanding ourselves in a whole different way, that we're not really an individual. That is the illusion, really. That the illusion of individuality, it's not that it's not has its own realness, but in fact, we are part of a Gaian cosmology, a deep web of interconnected sacredness of life itself. And when we experience and know ourselves in that way, then it's a whole different ballgame. We're not alone. You know, we're working together with all the planetary elements, all the beings, all the ancestors, everyone working, you know. So that's the shift. It's not so far away. And I think that is the spiritual workers, light workers, healers, and so on, awakeners, and influences in those realms. You know, I think the onus is in us to try and help people make sense of this moment and give a vision for this process. So it's not just we're not just collapsing and deregulating and devolving into, you know, into the scary scenario that current world leaders are normalizing, as you say. You know, like you know, just slog it out. Whoever's the most violent, whoever has the most weapons wins the day. You know, that's kind of where it's going to go if we don't actually say, let's create a new story together. Let's create a more hopeful vision together, and let's work for that.
Yeah. Let's create a new story together. That's a good way to really move to an insightful life, a life in which we're really looking inside ourselves. I just did an audiobook with my friend Duncan Trussell called From the Movie of Me to the Movie of We.
Oh, beautiful.
Which is exactly about, okay, how do you create a quote unquote new story? Right. And we used ourselves as examples of the kind of the way in which we were brought up into this world. Well, as soon as you get a name, oh, I'm a separate something, right? Oh, better protect that separate something from the vicissitudes of what goes on. And then you have wonderful habitual patterns that get created. You have neurotic tendencies, which you embellish, believing in every thought that you have, believing in that story of who you think you are. That's why Ram Dass was so great around identity, particularly, really pointing people out, pointing to people and how we do use that identity and role, and it overwhelms absolutely everything, And so then through this process, we start to realize, okay, that's again back to perspective, which we were talking about. We start to understand how we are identifying in a certain way, and that is causing pain, period, and suffering.
Yeah.
And so we look for a way out, and then that's creating a new story. Because ultimately, of course, all of it has to just go out through the wash, whatever concept, not knowing, living with uncertainty. These are things that, really help us to navigate the day-to-day world. But yeah. And that movie of We, How Do We Get There, was prime. Actually, in the end of the book, it's an audio book. Movie of Me, movieofme.com is where you can find out about it. I'm doing a little commercial for myself in the middle of this thing. But the last piece is, we took an excerpt from a talk that Ram Dass gave. And this became for me the transformational point that one could reach going from the movie of me to the movie of we. And it was all about compassion, of course, and generosity. And he told this fantastic story of a woman at one of his talks. And they were talking about compassion, and she was talking about how every day she'd go to the store, the bank, whatever errand she was doing, and pass by a homeless person and would give him $1 or $2, whatever, and acknowledge, they'd have a back and forth, and she'd move on. This went on for quite some time. And she started to think, wow, why can I not provide him a place in my home where he could be warm? And as soon as that happened, that thought came in her head. She was like full of fear. She was fear. She had fear about how that would take over her life, and the separateness that she felt on a daily basis would dissipate. And it's too unknown. The mystery of it is just too unfathomable for her to even take that next step, And so he talked about that in just an extraordinarily beautiful way. But yeah, generosity and compassion. How do we get there? How do we get there collectively is probably a more important question.
Well, I think at this stage, we know probably a lot of the answers, really. We've read all the books. I think really it's this unknowing and listening into the knowing heart, the present heart, the intuitive heart, and allowing that to guide us. So I think that's what Ajahn Chah called the living Dharma. It's not the things we perhaps... we can have an idea of what it means to be compassionate and try and live that out, but it's not necessarily really in relationship to what's really needed. And one can get into some really complex dynamics around that. Like, for example, when we lived in South Africa, just as apartheid fell, we were in a highly unequal dynamic where the white apartheid system was still operating in the deep rural area where we were working. So although there was political liberation, there wasn't economic equity or resource equity and so on. And I think, at first, when you come from the Northern Hemisphere and you have more privilege, you sort of start to feel like you feel that there's a lot of guilt and wanting to try and help everyone, and it becomes untenable, very, very quickly. And then you have to really think more collectively and communally and wisely what will really help, because it's not that you don't want to share or be generous, but, how do you do that? And you can be very generous to say, people that directly that living on the road, but then you can create, which happened for us, jealousies with other people. You can land up getting them, getting them sort of in dangerous situations where people want to take them out because they're getting something more than someone else. And so there's just lots and lots of complexities in these situations. And, in the end, what we did is started community engagement projects that empowered local people and got them waged, got them skilled up and able to respond directly. So these sorts of things, there's not like we have to recreate the wheel of what is compassionate action. It's just plugging into how do we do that without activating a sort of Western savior mode or and actually doing it in equitable ways. And there's some really interesting leading edge projects around that happening, where people are looking at very different ways of engaging community engagement and helping and redistribution of wealth and so on. All of these, I think there's a lot of people working on these fronts. It's not that the wisdom isn't there. It's really how do we align with that? How do we kind of find out about those? How do we explore the application of that in our personal and collective and communal spheres, So, but these are very profound questions, And again, it's more helpful sometimes if we move out of me having to figure it out into the collective. How do we figure this out? How would you do this? How do you think about this? What do you know? Who's doing this? So,
that's where Thich Nhat Hanh said, "The coming Buddha is the sangha."
Yes, I think that's
Maitreya.
That feels really true. It's not. We don't have to. We're not going to hold it all, but collectively, we all hold a piece.
Absolutely. Well, we're kind of at the end of our time together. I want to go back though, and I have another of Kabir's poems.
Oh, what translation are you using? Just out of interest.
Thomas Rain Crow.
Right.
You're familiar with him?
No.
So it's very modern, obviously, but I like it. So this one's called. So we had Illusion that we opened up with. And this one's called Faith that we're going to close with. Where are you looking for me? I am with you, my friend. Not in prayers or meditations, not in fasting, not in yogic postures, not in renunciation, not in New Age books or even in the body, and not even in infinite space, not in the womb of nature, not in the breath inside the breath. So seek and search sincerely. It will only take you a second. Kabir says, listen to what I say. Where your trust resides, it is there that you will find your God.
That's beautiful.
That to me is the greatest. I don't know how much we have talked about it when Ram Dass was alive, and retreats and the continuation of the retreats and courses and everything else we do. That always is there. That trust thing is there. I mean, of course, the funniest thing, one day I was in Hawaii at a retreat. It was up on stage with Ram Dass, just a couple of people, and somehow trust came up. And I said, Ram Dass, when I first met you, and you just completely engaged me eye to eye, I had, there wasn't any Richard Alpert, and there wasn't any Ram Dass. There was just this pool of absolute feeling of home kind of thing. And then deep trust, like I hadn't felt before. And maybe it was a baby with mother and all that, but a very, very deep trust. So I said, Ram Dass, what was your first experience of that kind of deep trust? And he looked out at the audience and he said, and me, and he went, mushrooms, mushrooms.
Yes, that will do it. Yeah.
But yeah, trust, it's all in that word, though, because once you have that, then intuition happens, and then you really can make friends. In my mind, you can make friends with uncertainty, with the mystery, as Roshi Halifax likes to term it all.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, beautiful. Right
Thank
on.
you so much.
Oh, thank you so
Thanissara.
much, Raghu. Yeah.
This has been great.
Yeah.
We'll have to do it again. We'll make sure in the show notes also that people can connect with you. And it was too long.
It was too long. Yeah, too long. But it's so good to see you and connect with this lineage. It's been so meaningful to me and Thanissara and myself. And all blessings for the new year, Raghu, and for your good health and for success at all you're doing.
Yes. And to everybody, that same message. May we all be peaceful and happy going into next year and do the things that we've been talking about on this podcast to transform as whatever we can in ourselves and around ourselves.
Beautiful.
We'll see you next time on Be Here Now Network, Mindrolling. Ram Ram.